Another day, another dollar makes you wonder where your mother went.
Hi, this is Jack Spirko with another edition of the Survival Podcast. Today we're going to talk about what I call common misconceptions about how you can actually deal with a survival situation, especially, let's say, a cataclysmic survival situation where we're talking about a drastic change in the United States economy, a drastic change in what's available, a drastic disruption of the food supply, maybe the electrical grid or the water supply, or maybe all of the above in those types of situations. And this really stems from the fact that, when I first started to learn more about survivalism and self-sufficiency and permaculture and, starting my own gardens and all, I guess in one way has been that way my whole life. Going back to being a child, I remember fondly growing a garden with my grandfather, and that garden wasn't just because it was nice to have homegrown vegetables. We didn't have, enough to completely survive off of the income that we had. My grandfather was disabled. He had black lung from working in the coal mines. My grandmother had gotten older. She couldn't go work every day. They had a little place in the country in the mountains of Pennsylvania, and they had lived there since the 20s. And their family had lived there just before that. They'd come. We're Ukrainian. We came from Ukraine after the communist revolution and the formation of the Soviet Union as refugees, and started life in this great nation in this little coal region town known as Jonestown, Pennsylvania, which is near. You might not even find that on a map. It's just north of another small town known as Minersville, where you can imagine, I guess most people, at least when the town was formed, were in the mining industry. And so I've always been, kind of the outdoor type, been into farming and growing crops and hunting and fishing and providing some level of food off the land my entire life. But then, like a lot of people from small towns, I ended up moving into a big city and building a career and starting to build a successful professional life, getting a nice car, getting a nice house, having a family, raising a son, all the things that are part of the American dream, at least the American industrial dream. And a little bit of that of me kind of got put to sleep. I don't think it ever totally went to sleep, but some of it did. And then in recent years, I started to really examine, based on what I've learned about business and the economy, our own nation and how we were suited in the world financially. And the first thing that waked me up was looking at the financial side of things and realizing how in debt this nation was. And then I started to look at just how vulnerable we were and how, when there were disasters, like I just recently did a podcast on Hurricane Katrina, what the result was and what would happen if something was bigger. So I started to then go into the internet communities. Because by that time they started springing up. There's chat boards, and I hang out occasionally on the backwoodshome.com chat forum, and I started seeing what people post and what people think and how their mentality is. And I quickly realized in a very short period of time, because I actually had practical experience with doing some small local farming and hunting and fishing and trapping and things like that, that people had some real misconceptions about what they would do in a situation that is a true national or global survival situation, a complete, the end of the world as we know it scenario. And there's 15 big ones, and I kind of want to go over them with you in today's podcast. And the first one, and the biggest misconception I think that a lot of people have is, I'm just going to live off the land. I'll just hunt and fish and grow food. And my question to you, if it's going to be that easy, then why aren't you doing it now? Because you know what? It'd be a lot easier to go out, find yourself a piece of land. In fact, something I recommend people do is find themselves a piece of land. But it would be a lot easier to go out, earn enough money to outright buy a piece of land that you own somewhere in the country, somewhere in rural America with low taxes, where you would have very little financial needs, but you would have the conveniences of running water and electricity and a reasonably sound structure and the protection of law enforcement around you, and you could go do whatever you want. We're still pretty free in this nation. If it's going to be that easy, why aren't you doing it now? And if you can't do it now, what's going to happen when thousands of other people are out there competing for the resources? How many deer do you think you're going to shoot in the woods near your town when everybody decides that anarchy is now in play and the hell with seasons and I'm hungry and I need some food? It's just not possible without extensive planning to live off the land. Now, if you set up for yourself the ability to live off the land, you can live off the land to a large degree. And what you need to do is create that ability while times are good, so if they go wrong, you already have that ability set up. But you can't just tomorrow pack up a sack, grab a gun, a couple boxes of shells, some beef jerky, a couple bottles of water, and hit the forest and live in the forest. It's not going to be that easy. The next thing is that whatever's going to happen will become in one big giant explosion. The conspiracy theorists think that the black helicopters are going to fly one day and martial law will be declared and the U.S. will be taken over by some foreign power, the United Nations, or world government will come and they'll put the Christians in the concentration camps. And I got to tell you, I'm not so worried about that. And I don't think what we're going to have is one big explosion. What we're going to have is a slow and increasing rate of downward spiral, where it begins with oil prices continuing to rise, gas keeps going up, the economy is more and more wounded. People in foreign nations stop loaning the United States money. We have less money to pay our people. Government services begin to fail. Some of the people that have been living off the government dime for 20, 30, or 40 years, their entire family's culture is now based on a welfare state. It won't be there. They're not going to just sit around and give up. They're going to go out and take something. There'll be riots. There'll be things like that. And slowly our economy and our society and our law and order and our structure begin to degrade. The government tries to hold on. Then there are areas where martial law is declared. People are rounded up. And it's not going to be these giant rounded up scenarios like the Nazis did or anything, but you'll have inner city areas that are put under martial law and curfew. And everything like that occurs, each step along the way, makes it harder and harder for recovery to ever occur. That's how I see this coming. So what that means is that you need to be aware of your surroundings every day and looking at situations and going, is it going downhill? And right now it sure feels like it is. That's not to say we won't have another recovery. We've had a lot of downhills and a lot of recoveries. But my point is that it will be a slow, gradual downhill that will most likely lead us into a true new world that we're not going to be completely happy with. And we're going to have to change our society and our life to adapt to that. And don't just expect that it's going to happen overnight. The next big one is that either I or my family and I will be able to make it on our own. That I'm going to be a loner. I'm going to go out and I'm going to get a place out in the middle of Jabip, in the middle of nowhere, and we're going to plant, an acre or two and hunt and fish and trap. And even if you set that up in advance, that's a great start. It's a great position to be in. But you're not going to make it alone. It's very difficult for one man or for a small family group to provide for all their needs. There's going to need to be in a post-disaster society or a post-carbon fuel society or a post-major disease-ridden society. If a pandemic comes and then runs its course and drops the population massively, it ruins the ability to distribute services, etc. In a situation like that, there's going to have to be community. You're going to have to reach out to people. You're going to have other people involved. And that's why it's a good idea for you now in your preparedness to find people that are like-minded that are in your area. Maybe it's not your neighbors. There's a good chance it's not your neighbors. But, reach out into these survival forums and chat forums and things like that, and look for the level-headed people, the people that aren't out there with a tinfoil hat, that make the rest of us look bad, that really understand where we're headed and start to make agreements and start to do, if you want to start doing some gardening, start doing some community gardening now. This is not a new thing. It's been around forever. When I was a kid, we used to grow everything in our garden, it seemed, but we didn't grow corn. Our garden wasn't that big. If you want to grow corn, you got to grow it in a really big area. Well, there was a farmer friend of ours named Snokey, and he would grow feed corn, and he grew some sweet corn mixed in with the feed corn to help with fertilization. And we would buy from him every year. We'd bring him some deer meat. He made wonderful sausage for us. and we pay him for that. But because we did that, he would always give us some sweet corn. And I would usually bring him, in the summertime, I would bring him zucchini. He didn't want to mess around with zucchini. He was a true farmer. He's running a tractor. And squash is not something that you take time to plant a few hills of when you're growing 30 or 40 acres of grain. So I would take him zucchini, and then his wife would make some of it into zucchini bread and give me some of the loaves of bread. I mean, it was just this, and that was just one family that I interacted with. There was another family up the road that when the tomatoes would really start to go crazy toward the end of the year and we had more than we could eat, I would take them big bags of tomatoes. They would give us cuttings of dill, and I would take that to my grandmother. She would use the dill to make pickles out of the cucumbers. And then we would take some of those pickles back to the people who gave us the dill. This whole cooperative thing was going on. It wasn't survival planning. It was community. It's the community that we've lost. If you're going to make it in that kind of a world, in that post-disaster world, you're going to have to be someone that fits into a community like that and starts knowing your neighbors' names again. Start looking for that interaction today. It'll be much easier to forge those relationships today than after these disasters occur. Another fallacy is that there'll always be recovery. Things will always get better. No matter how big the storm, no matter how big the earthquake, no matter how big the disease, infection, what have you, there's always, to every cycle, there's a down and there's an up. Well, I'm going to ask you something. How many Romans do you see around today? Rome fell and it never came back. And sure, the world recovered and the world changed, but people forget how long between the fall of Rome and the dawn of a new society it was. There was this thing called the Dark Ages. That's what that was. And that was also compounded by a mini ice age, something else we might end up having to deal with. Despite what the global warming people tell us, I'm more afraid of the planet cooling itself. It's something that tends to happen. I think some of the climatologists are pretty convinced that in the next couple of years we're going to end our warming period and go into a natural cooling period. If anything aggravates that, we could have that. So you have to think about the fact that you may end up in a true end of the world scenario. And not an end of the world as in nobody's left, as in the nuclear bombs have gone off, but simply it's not coming back the way that it was ever again. And you're going to have to adapt to that. You can't have all your planning simply be about making it for a week, 2 weeks, or a month. Now, if you've listened to some of my other podcasts, you know that's what I think step one is. You get prepared for a week, then you get prepared for 2 weeks, then you get prepared for a month. But once you get that done, the best thing to do is set up your life into the type of life that you want to live and make it so you can continue to live that type of life afterward. That may be challenging depending on what kind of lifestyle you want, but I think if you're a survival-minded person, you probably want a fairly simple life really to begin with. Another thing that people are really at misconception with, not really in a survival situation, but the overall economy and state of things, is that, you know what, we can always drill for more oil. That it's our clowns in Congress that aren't letting us drilling in the place that we should be right now. That there's oil in Anwar, there's oil in the continental shelf. Hell, there's still oil in Texas. All we need to do is drill and pump this oil. And even though everybody's sitting on their hands, when we're out, we'll start drilling and pumping. Number one, the opponents to drilling are telling us right now, well, if you guys start drilling today, it's going to take you 5, 10, 20 years in some of these locations to even produce any oil, and then you're going to have to get it onto refineries. And they're right. That doesn't mean we shouldn't drill. I do think that by not drilling, we're hastening our eventual peak oil situation. By not building new refineries, we're going to get there quicker. We're not giving ourselves, what we should be doing right now is we should be drilling like crazy. We should drill everywhere. We should drill environmentally sensitively, but we should be drilling. We should be building new refineries, and we should be taking some portion of the money that we're making off of doing all this and dedicating it to building these alternative sources of energy. We can't turn to them right now because they're not there. And a lot of these sources like solar, wind, and whatnot, they're not as great as the spin makes them out to be. They're woefully inadequate compared to fossil fuels. They have a long way to go, maybe 50 years or more, before they're able to make a real dent in the needs based on the society the way it's run today. So don't believe that we can just drill for more. Don't believe that, because that's the part of, believing there's always a recovery. It's part of why there's not always a recovery. We can't just drill for more. That's another big myth. Another risk factor people, I think, have as a big myth, and I see this on a lot of forums, is they just believe, I'm going to keep my money in cash. And they believe that cash is a risk-free way of holding wealth. Well, put into Google the value of the United States dollar and search Google Images. Click on Images and do an image search on Google for value of the dollar. Look for a graph that shows you what the value of the dollar relative to the rest of the world's currency has done recently. It has plummeted. Absolutely plummeted. We have foreign investors coming to the United States buying our land up now because they're buying it for pennies on the dollar because they have stronger currencies than us and because our land's depleted. Cash is not a risk-free way to hold your money. It's a way. And there's nothing wrong with holding some money in cash. I recommend you always have some cash reserves on you. But I also recommend you do things like diversify a little bit into some gold and silver, and having some silver coinage is always a good idea. People talk about having gold, but let's say that we are in a situation where we're out doing the barter thing and you do need to use some form of cash that has real value. A gold coin is going to be very, very valuable, and you'll be making a very large purpose with even a small gold coin. So silver coinage will give you the ability to buy things like a bushel of apples, which we may get down to the level where that's really what's important. So I do recommend keeping some silver coinage around. Just some good old-fashioned U.S. currency. I mean, one thing that is remarkable is that in about 1935, a gallon of gas in the United States was roughly a quarter. Today, if you have a silver quarter, you go down to your coin shop, sell it for the value of the silver, take that cash, go down to the gas station, you buy yourself right about a gallon of gas. That's how well silver has held its value over the years. So you just realize that cash in itself is not a completely risk-free thing. Another thing that people seem to believe is that food will never just run out. We're just not going to run out of food. I mean, we might run out of like high-quality, grade A beef, but man, there's going to be at least some rice and beans around. The shelves will not be empty. I'll be able to get something to eat. All you got to do is look at what happens to the grocery stores in a community that's about to be hit by a hurricane. Those stores get wiped out while there's still the ability for them to be resupplied. All you have to do is cut off the supply of shipments into stores for a couple weeks, and they will go bare. Stores operate by turning over inventory as quickly as possible. They do not like to sit on their inventory. And you go and you see these huge supermarkets everywhere and go, man, there's so much food. But if those stores are being well run, and most of them are, that food has a very, very high turnover rate. Food, folks, can indeed completely run out. Another myth is that the national debt just isn't going to affect the average Joe or Jane. That's the business of senators and Congress people. I mean, it doesn't really affect us, right? Well, let me tell you, folks, indeed, the national debt does affect us all. It doesn't affect us day to day, but it affects us because eventually the bills of the United States are coming due, and we don't, again, I've said this before, we borrow from foreign sources about $1 billion a day as a nation to pay interest on debt. So we go $1 billion deeper in debt to pay on the interest on the debt we already had. Our debt is in the trillions, and it is growing. Social Security alone will consume 100% of projected available revenue by 2050. That means no firemen, no police officers, no army, no roads, no anything except Social Security by 2050. That sounds like a long way away. It's 42 years. It's not that far. And that's just one government program. One. There's a lot more than one government program to be supported. We'll start to see failures in a relatively short time. Definitely within a decade, you're going to start to see some government programs that simply have got to fail. And it's because of this massive national debt. Another thing I think a lot of people believe is the biggest threats to our nation are overseas. It's the Illuminati. It's the New World Order. It's the communists. It's the Chinese. It's the terrorists. It's blah, 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 blah. Our biggest threat's right here. Our biggest threat to our existence is either a natural disaster on a major scale, some huge calamity that we might not even be able to conceive of. Something akin to a Yellowstone volcanic event, something we didn't even understand the scope of until just a few decades ago, or a major meteor impact or something like that. These things are possible, and they're things that we never even speculated on just a few years ago, which makes us wonder what else is out there that could happen that we're not even aware could happen yet. A major solar storm that shuts down the electrical grid. That's not even just possible. It's probable that at some point, sooner or later, some type of storm like that from the sun will hit the electrical grid as we understand it today and shut it down. There's risks that we can't fathom that are natural in origin. But our biggest risk, it's our dependence on the rest of the world. You think about it today, you go to a restaurant, sit down and order a nice yuppie-type Caesar salad with chicken breast on it. Odds are that the lettuce that's on your plate, nice and cold and crisp, coated with that wonderful Parmesan cheese and that creamy Caesar dressing, might have traveled 2,000 miles to end up in that plate in front of you. We can't even grow our own lettuce. That's our risk. It's not that the lettuce comes from overseas, it's that we can't produce it here. So we're not producing our own food. It's coming from Argentina. It's coming from Australia. It's coming from all over the world right now. We're having food shipped to us. We're having oil shipped to us. We're having our goods shipped to us. We're having our cars shipped to us. Our nation has become a services-oriented nation. We don't build enough things anymore. We don't manufacture enough things anymore. We don't grow enough things anymore. More and more of our fields that do grow crops, we're growing corn to make gas substitutes. We're growing ethanol. And we're using more gas to make a gallon of ethanol than we use, or more oil to make a gallon of ethanol than we use oil to make a gallon of gas. So we're taking food out of our system. We're spending money that we don't have to do it, because we're doing it with subsidies. We're making an inefficient fuel, and we're taking food off the table all at the same time. Folks, our biggest threat is right here, and it's economic failure. That's our biggest threat, and I don't think many people realize that. Another thing I don't think people realize is that, or I think people are under the belief that if I live in small-town America, this stuff's not as important to me. This is only going to affect big cities. All the riots are going to be in big cities. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen in the suburbs, in the nice little, beautiful, white picket fence suburbs of the United States of America, your neighbor will steal from you when his family will starve without him doing it. Rioting and mass hysteria can happen anywhere there's more than a couple dozen people. Anywhere at all. Now, it's true, the more rural you are, the more independent the people around you are, the less dependent upon the system they are, the less likely a breakdown is. But you need to be prepared for society to break down around you just about anywhere in the United States today when this thing goes to pot, so to speak. And sooner or later, it's gonna happen. Another misconception is today, well, at least the banks won't fail. They're insured by the government. I mean, we're not going to have a Great Depression again where you go to the bank and they're out of money. If the government's out of money, they can't insure the banks. We just saw one bank fail. We may see as many as 4 to 5 more banks, more global financial institutions fail in the next 4 to 5 years. There's 4 or 5 of them right now. I get a newsletter every day called The Daily Reckoning. Go to thedailyreckoning.com and get on that newsletter. Not a sponsor again, just somebody that I really enjoy reading from, and they make a lot of sense. And they'll explain to you why the banks indeed can fail and why some of them still are. Another thing that I really think people just aren't aware of, or don't believe is possible, or what have you, or maybe just don't understand, is I think people are of the opinion that we always are in an economy where we either are experiencing a good, solid, level economy that's going through a very slow rate of inflation. It's good. It's just a good economy. Everything's good. Everything's getting better. And then if we have a negative impact on our economy, there's really only 2 different types of things that cause that. One is inflation. That's where the price of everything is just running away. And because things are getting more and more expensive, that's bad for the economy, and people can't afford things. And they look at, like right now, the inflation's running away. Food's going up, gas is going up, etc. All right? The other type of problem with an economy is slow or no growth, where there's less jobs, there's a downturn in the economy, things are actually going down in price, where because there's just less growth, business is having to kind of give stuff away, so to speak, give away the farm. And you look at the Great Depression, they had a major deflation during the Great Depression. My grandfather used to tell me a joke that was kind of serious at the same time. He'd say that, he would go down to the market during the Depression, and there'd be, a big bushel full of apples for like 4 cents, which even in the Depression, that was pretty cheap. And he'd look and he said, all I could do is go, damn, that's cheap. And what he meant by that is the great buy. I mean, 4 cents for a bushel of apples, even in 1930-odd something, that's a great deal. But if you don't have the 4 cents, it might as well be $1 million. That's the deflation. Well, there's something that's called stagflation. It was coined by an economist over in the UK a number of decades ago. And that's where we have both deflation and inflation negatively impacting the economy at the same time. That's where we have the price of gas and oil and food and things like that, and manufactured goods going up, 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 up. Yet we have deflation where people are basically giving away full-size pickup trucks right now. People can't sell their property. The value of property is in decline. And the economy isn't growing at the same time that the basic necessities of economy are going up. Stagflation is the worst of the worst. It's the 1970s and the 1930s together at the same time. And we're in the initial stages of it today. That's a risk and a danger that I don't think most people even understand or intrinsically are aware of. Another belief that people have in these survival scenarios, and it's kind of what, feeds the concept of like what you call the 72-hour survival kit, being able to make it for 3 days at least so that government officials or services or volunteers or somebody can come get you. Again, that's what you plan for initially. That's one thing to be prepared for. And if that's the scenario that you end up in, and you can make it 3 days or longer, and you do, and you get out of it, great. Let's have a party. Let's be happy. Let's be grateful to God that we all got through it. But the belief that sooner or later, if it's a week, if it's a month, sooner or later, someone's going to come get you, that is a myth. That is a complete myth. It's not true. You can be somewhere where no one's ever coming to get you. I remember there was a flood in a little area, an area trailer park up in North Texas about a year ago. And there was this lady, they kept playing her on the radio. And they were playing her as like to drive home how bad it was. And she was really kind of whiny sounding to me, saying, no one got us out. No one got us out. We ended up having to get ourselves out. And I'm thinking, of course you had to get yourself out. It was a flood that happened in the middle of the night. No one even knew there was a flood there. Of course you had to get yourself out. But that's the mentality that gets people killed. I'll just wait and everything will be okay. Someone will come get us. Someone will come help us. That is a myth. You cannot rely on that being the case. And then the biggest myth of all, and I don't think this is a survival myth among the survival-minded community at all, but I think it's a big myth that prevents people from kind of joining our community, so to speak. And that is the belief that you really can't do anything about all this stuff. That all these things that the government's doing to screw up the money supply, to screw up the fuel supply and all, hey, you know what? It doesn't really matter anyway. There's nothing you can do about it. All you can do is just don't worry about it, rock on with life, you'll be happier. The reality is there's been countless studies done about catastrophes, disasters, and survival situations. And the number one differentiating factor with people that get out of situations and end up okay and survive and make it and thrive in the middle of these catastrophes isn't even how prepared they are. As shocking as that might sound, it's the belief that they have that what they do matters. You have to remember in every situation, what you do, your action or your inaction, your choices, they make a difference, and you do have a choice. And I'm glad you've been making the choice to tune into my podcast and that you've been listening to me. I've really enjoyed doing this. I'm still a little rusty at it, but I think I'm going to get better as we go. I'm starting to really enjoy these things and come up with new ideas. And remember always, the Survival Podcast is here to help you figure out how to live the kind of life you want to live if things get tough. or even if they don't.
Makes you wonder where your money went. You can scream and you can holler. It really doesn't matter, 'cause it all gets spent.